This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. So what do you do? Information about getting involved in advanced technology careers, making everything from clean energy to life-saving medicine, is available at dreamitdoitvirginia.com. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond. Not too many days ago, there was a very interesting primary in Virginia, and particularly interesting in the 7th Congressional District here in the greater Richmond area and some outlying counties. And that evening, as many of us watched the news, whether we turned to CNN, MSNBC, Fox, or one of the networks, it seemed as though everyone was trying to figure out what had happened. And in my candid opinion, most of them were getting it wrong that evening. So we're delighted to have on the program today Dr. Lauren Bell, who in your work at Randolph, Macon, both in political science and now also the Dean of Academic Affairs, but particularly the political science side of Dr. Bell, we really want to hear from you about your perspective on what happened in the 7th Congressional District here in Virginia.
First, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. Let me start by explaining where I was on election night, and I was on vacation in Bermuda. So imagine my surprise when I turned on the television, and what do I see? But Dave Brat has been declared the winner of the 7th District. And of course, I'm watching, I think, CNN from Hamilton, Bermuda, and I'm thinking, why is Dave on TV here? And then I see the scroll at the bottom that he'll face Jack Trammel in the general election. And so then I do a double take and think, are there two Jack Trammels? And so I was really quite surprised to turn on the television and to see this from, quite a ways away. But like you, I had the same reaction as I was listening to the press. I thought, they're not telling the story right. And so from my perspective, I think as much as, we've all been congratulating Professor Brat on his victory, I think this was also about Eric Cantor losing the election. And I don't think that's been talked about quite as much.
One of the networks even said, someone said, it was all the rain that was taking place. And now, you would not have known that
No.
being in Bermuda, but some of us were saying, where was the rain on that day? Maybe was there a little bit in Culpeper or Spotsylvania, but not in the heart of the 7th District.
Well, weather can have an impact on turnout, but I think if you look at the turnout figures, it doesn't look like turnout was suppressed during Tuesday's primary. I don't think rain or weather explains the story, and likewise, I don't think it was immigration, which was certainly on election night, and certainly as I was flipping channels through the various national news networks, I don't think it was immigration either. I really do think this is a case of our incumbent congressman not doing enough to shore up his support in the district, and that by the time he realized that maybe he wasn't going to kind of coast to victory, it was too late to really start to recover the ground he had lost.
Speaking of the immigration issue, because I was rather startled that evening that it seemed like on every channel on the TV, it was always immigration. It was immigration.
Right.
And I was trying to think, did those mailers that came out, which I received from both campaigns, and many people did, how much was dealing with immigration? And then I believe I've seen something where there was some polling done that same day in the district about immigration. Tell us something
Sure.
about that.
Sure. So public policy polling, which does what we call robo-polls, they generate samples that are appropriate, but then they use telephone polling, and a voice asks people to choose one if you prefer Eric Cantor, choose two if you prefer David Brat, choose one if you support immigration reform, choose two if you are opposed to immigration reform. And on election day itself, public policy polling did one of these robo-polls. And the results of that were really interesting because as the national and international media are saying, well, the reason that Eric Cantor lost was because Dave Brat hammered him on immigration, the poll showed that somewhere around 70%, maybe even slightly higher, of respondents in the district were actually expressing support for immigration reform. So this notion that you have people in the district just being fired up about immigration and wanting to prevent any possibility of a change or of maybe a weakening of our kind of hardline immigration policy just didn't jive with what the polls were showing.
Speaking of the polls, I know you've done some work in the past on exit polling.
That's right.
And of course, you were some distance away. We should have
Right.
had you and your
I
colleagues
know,
or someone here doing
I'm
exit.
regretting that, like the one time I'm not exit polling. This is such a big event.
Yeah. And are you aware of anyone having done any exit polling in the district that would have seen what was the correlation between the numbers you mentioned
Sure.
from the district-wide robo-poll and,
Right.
and the ones that went out and voted?
Right. I'm not aware that anybody did any exit polling. I mean, if you actually go back and try to find polls in this race, they're hard to come by. The one poll that got a lot of attention was the McLaughlin Poll. That this is the polling firm that Eric Cantor hired. It was a firm essentially working for the campaign, and that poll had showed that Cantor was going to win with a 34% margin of victory. I think that poll got a lot of attention, and political scientists and journalists typically take candidate-sponsored polls with a grain of salt. But I don't think anybody saw this race as being close enough to pay enough attention to get pollsters out there in the field to survey. I mean, that's expensive, it's time-consuming, and I think the narrative was Eric Cantor's going to win this. It might be close, it might not be by as large a margin as he's won in the past, but that was sort of the narrative, both, I think, in D.C., in political circles. Certainly, I think here in Richmond it was as well. And I think that neglected what was happening at the grassroots level.
And the polling, as I understand, was all internal polling. It was not really released, because I do recall maybe a week before the election seeing something mailed out from the Brat campaign that said on one of our polls,
Right.
we show it 50, 42,
Right.
52, 40, somewhere in that range.
Right. The
But
Brat
still with Cantor winning.
That's right. That's right. What came from the campaign, although I think it came from an organization that was independently working with the Brat campaign. Remember, the Brat campaign didn't have a lot of money, so they weren't doing a lot. They weren't hiring a lot of outside consultants and pollsters, but they were working with some organizations that were kind of working on their behalf. And so I received the same information, and it suggested that Brat had narrowed the gap. Again, though, that's sort of an internal kind of poll. And so when you look at it, you say, well, of course, the Brat campaign wants people to be excited and feel like they're not going to waste their vote if they go out to vote for him. Cantor, on the other hand, wants to be assuring the Republican establishment that he's going to be in Congress in January. And so you kind of just say, well, all right, we'll see. But the fact of the matter is, we've never had a sitting House Majority Leader lose in a primary election, let alone in a general election. And so, people, I think, thought, well, this is kind of Eric Cantor's seat. The district had been gerrymandered at least twice. We can argue about gerrymandering, but it had been drawn in a way that was supposed to maximize Cantor's ability to continue to win. And so I don't think people paid a lot of attention.
Now, I understand there's been some explanation given by the McLaughlin polling group to try
right.
to explain how they how their numbers were? What's the word on them?
So, gosh, about 5 or 6 days ago, McLaughlin released another poll that they commissioned at their own expense, right? So they had been working for the Cantor campaign. They'd been paid by the campaign. And of course, on election night, they were vilified for having gotten it so wrong. And so they released another poll last week that, again, they did at their expense. And this one, they sampled a little bit differently. So the first poll that they did, and this was, several weeks before the election, that poll had shown that Eric Cantor was going to win by this double-digit margin. Well, the second poll, no, I should say that sample was based on people who were expected, who said they were Republicans and who expected to vote. This most recent poll that they did last week after the election, they expanded their sample to include people who were Democrats and independents. And what they found when they did that was they found a number of Democrats and independents, or people who made the claim that they were Democrats and independents, who also said they had gone to the polls and had voted for David Brat. And so by extrapolation, they said, well, if that's the case, based on our sample, we actually project that that the Democrats and independents might have turned out enough people to have made the difference in the election. Now, of course, my initial response to that is they're looking for a way to explain away this disastrous polling result from before the election, but I also think there's something to that. I think Democrats and independents played a role here.
So the open primary, as we refer to it in Virginia, could have been a significant part of the results.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I'm surprised that McLaughlin, when they did their initial polling, didn't take that into consideration. Right. I mean, many states have closed primaries. Unless you are either registered as a member of that party or you declare that you are a member for the purpose of a contested primary, you can't participate. Of course, in Virginia, we don't have party registration and we don't have closed primaries. So all of that makes it a little more of a free-for-all. And particularly in close elections, crossover voting can make a difference. So I do think the fact that the primary was open probably was of some consequence here.
So going back to some comments you made earlier, you don't really view this so much as a Tea Party victory as some are viewing it?
So I don't necessarily. I think we have to look at Cantor, look at his popularity within the district, look at what I would say were some fundamental flaws on his part, and I'll talk about just a couple of them. First, if you go back to May of 2013, Public Policy Polling did a different robo-poll where, among other things, they asked 7th District voters how they felt about Eric Cantor. And so remember, this is a year before the primary. Only 26% of the survey respondents said they had a favorable opinion of Cantor.
26. Wow.
40% said they had an unfavorable opinion, and 34% said that they weren't sure how they felt about him. So if you start there, if I'm Cantor, if I'm running that campaign, I say, well, wow, wait a second, 26% is pretty low. 40% is worrisome, but I've got this 34% who are undecided, who don't know how they feel, and I've got to start pulling them back into the fold and making them feel good about Eric Cantor. So a year before the election, that signal is there. So again, if I'm the Cantor campaign, I get my candidate to every community event that's happening throughout the district over the last year. I very carefully figure out what my message is going to be. They knew that Dave Brat was going to be running against them by the end of last year. So they had almost 7 months to figure out what to do. And that brings me to the second mistake that I think that he made. Brat was not very well known, had almost no name recognition. He was being supported by the Tea Party, and for a variety of reasons they had sort of soured on Cantor. So he was being supported by the Tea Party. And he was not somebody who he didn't have much political experience. So when he would make public appearances, he would seem stiff and very professorial. The Cantor campaign could have, in essence, ignored him. They could have worked on pulling those district voters back to Eric Cantor without having to really engage Brat very much. But when they made the decision to run campaign ads district-wide and to send mailers district-wide, they did two things. They made Brat a household name, which he was absolutely not before. And they made some claims. They sort of didn't do a lot of research about him. So clearly he's a professor. Well, he must be a liberal professor because he was on the Board of Economists when Tim Kaine was governor. Of course, that's not a partisan position. And so these mailers put Brat's name in front of every household. And people started to say, well, who is this guy? And when they went to his website, he wasn't a liberal college professor. He was someone that people thought, well, hey, he's credible. He's viable. And I think that was really the biggest flaw. Cantor made Brat somebody who was actually a realistic, viable candidate. And had he not done that, had he just been silent, I think Brat might have continued to be sort of painted as this outcast or outsider.
You know, just an anecdotal comment or reaction around Capitol Square. I've heard people say the Cantor campaign was missing Boyd Marcus, And for our statewide viewers who might say, who was Boyd Marcus? Well, he was really the architect of many of the Cantor victories as well as other victories, who supported Governor McAuliffe and then fell out of favor with Republicans and is no longer a part of that, was not a part of that campaign.
Right.
And
I think you're right. I think that's part of it. You also have to remember that Cantor had only ever had 2 previous primary challenges, right? The first time he ran in 2000, he had a challenger in the primary, and then in 2012. He's not someone who is, and Floyd Bain in 2012 was a serious challenger, but not someone who necessarily was able to chip away at Cantor in quite the same way. And circumstances were different then. The Tea Party hadn't totally turned against Eric Cantor yet, and Cantor had been working closely with them in 2010 and 2011. Circumstances, of course, changed, but I think, for Cantor to just not be experienced with a primary challenger, and certainly not one that, again, people were finding credible and viable, I think that also hurt quite a bit.
Turning attention back to what's around the Richmond area called the center of the universe.
That's right.
The town of Ashland.
That's right.
Where Randolph Macon College is located. This has got to be a tremendously exciting time for the campus, for the professors, and because now, of course, I understand there may be a libertarian who claims that State Board of Elections has said he has enough names in, and so by the time our viewers are seeing this program, we'll know if it's a 3-way race.
Right.
But assuming for the moment that it will be the Republican or the Democrat who would win, and it's a Republican district, it's going to be an interesting time at Randolph-Macon with 2 professors.
Absolutely. And so I've gotten a lot of questions, what are these guys like? And I want to say, both of them are really great people. They're genuine and they're sincere. What you see is what you get with both of them. So, I think the viewers can be confident that, when they see Dave Brat on TV, when they begin to see more of Jack Trammel, they're going to see very genuine images of who these 2 people are. And both of them are incredibly well liked on our campus. They're very different. Dave is much more extroverted, and I'd say Jack is more introverted, but they are incredibly well liked. They are known for the care that they give to their students and their teaching. So it's exciting in that sense, right? We feel good that we've got 2 people that we like very much and respect very much, and who our students have benefited greatly from. But yeah, it's a little bit surreal. Like I said, my first reaction was, are there 2 Jack Trammels? Because it was just so surprising that sort of over the weekend before the election, the Democrats in the 7th District said, we really do need to have a candidate. And Jack had been involved with the 7th District Democrats in the past, but I didn't know that he was even thinking about contesting the seat. So.
Well, some have said that not only do they play basketball together, but it could be a real civil campaign between Dave and Jack and really debating the issues. What I think will be interesting is the outside groups that will be doing a great deal of spending money in the district, and whether they will be the ones that go negative, because one might assume and even hope that the 2 professors will run a a more positive
Right.
campaign.
Right. I mean, I don't know that they are social friends, but they do play basketball together. We have a faculty men's basketball team, and so they know each other. They work together on student issues quite frequently. I certainly would anticipate that they would be very respectful and civil toward one another. You're absolutely right. It's always, what do the groups from outside do? And certainly if we think of them as true independent expenditures, then there's not campaign control over what happens. I think the issue of a libertarian in the race, assuming that goes forward, I think that's going to create some pressures for the Brat campaign. I think one of the things that we still don't totally know for sure is really to what extent those Democrat and independent crossover votes really did help him, and to what extent were people voting in favor of Dave Brat and not against Eric Cantor. And if it turns out that these were primarily anti-Cantor votes and they were populated heavily by Democrats and independents, the presence of a libertarian is going to change the dynamics for the Brat campaign. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how all of that plays out. Of course, it's the summer right now, so neither of them are around very much, although certainly they are continuing to be in touch on various matters related to their jobs, as you know, faculty do, even though everyone thinks they don't work during the summer. We all work during the summer.
Right.
So.
Well, your perspectives, both from your Ph.D. and you're working on the Hill Senate Judiciary Committee and also with the Sentencing Commission, the Supreme Court. You've also got some national perspective. So in our closing minutes, any thoughts or comments that you'd want to make about other races that you see either in Virginia
Sure.
or around the country?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'd say is there's a real anti-incumbent feeling right now. The sentiment nationally is very much anti-incumbent, and that it cuts across Republican and Democrat. The most recent Congresses have been very unproductive. And I think the public is tired of that. They may not want Congress to do things they don't like, but they'd like Congress to actually be doing something. So I think that anti-incumbency factor is going to be important in November. You know, one of the questions that I've been asked is, well, what does this mean, you know, the Cantor loss for the House of Representatives? And certainly I think the national Republicans are grappling with that. They've elected a new majority leader, Kevin McCarthy. McCarthy's one of the other young guns, so I don't necessarily see a huge change in the direction of the leadership in the House of Representatives. But at the same time, having said that, I also don't see that in the long run, the Cantor loss, while it's incredibly exciting right now and incredibly unexpected, you know, Congress as an institution, things change slowly. We have a saying, you know, the institution always wins, and Congress is going to continue to be Congress, and this is going to have some big ripples for a little while, but those will dissipate. And I think, you know, really what's going to matter more is what does the House and Senate look like after November, and potentially, you know, the Republicans think they can pick up the Senate, so we'll see if that happens.
You know, tell our viewers that we're having the conversation on Monday, the
Yes.
23rd of June. It's the day the General Assembly will be back later this evening, so we can't really comment on what they have done with regards to the governor's vetoes. But I would be interested in our last minute or so,
Sure.
your comment about the General Assembly's reaction that took place immediately after the primary. It seemed to be that they went somewhat into shock.
Sure. I think there was a fair amount of shock. Again, nobody really was paying a lot of attention because the expectation was that Cantor would win. I think that's where you might see some longer term impact, particularly to the extent that people are seeing this as a Tea Party victory. If the Republicans locally see this as sort of the resurgence of the Tea Party or the continuing power of the Tea Party, that's likely to make a big difference, particularly as they approach dealing with Governor McAuliffe's vetoes. I'm not convinced that that's an accurate way to look at this. I'm not sure that we know enough about how the role that the Tea Party played and to what extent, again, that was different from Cantor. But I think it will be interesting here locally to see whether this causes some Republicans to dig their heels in and just say, I'm not willing to to give the governor what he wants because I'm afraid for my seat.
Dr. Lauren Bill, thank you so much for being on This Week in
Thank you
Richmond.
again
We look
for
forward
having me.
to having you back.
Great.
Thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. So what do you do? Information about getting involved in advanced technology careers, making everything from clean energy to life-saving medicine, is available at dreamitdoitvirginia.com. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.